How are you guys doing? Today is Friday, January 7th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an individual profile on Ozzie Albies. The elite second baseman for the Atlanta Braves out of Curaçao turns 25 today, and my intention with this episode is, of course, to point out on a micro level his impact and how he's been able to dominate at such a tough position to be incredibly dominant in, game in and game out. It is very hard for the millions of people that are competing for very few finite spots in the leagues in the U.S. to at least jump up to that starting position and, of course, hold it. Not only that, be one of the best in the league. And, of course, I'm going to take a step back and examine what he's been able to do and impact the game on a macro level. And if you're, and I guess at this very moment, if you're familiar with who Ozzie Albies is, he was one of the best players for a team that would go on to win the World Series this year. And, of course, his impact with the Atlanta Braves is extended beyond that. But I'm just going to get into his background. But before I get into it, I just got to mention he's about 5'8", 5'9", and he's one of the better switch hitters that you'll see in the game. Considering you don't see that many players that are hitting switch for their advantage, but he's just one of the better players in baseball, and the fact that he's only 25 and he's done so much is really telling for what he can do as a player. So, getting back into it, I already said that he was originally out of Curaçao. That is, I believe, exactly where Andrew Jones came from, the former Brave center fielder that went on to win a decade's worth of Gold Gloves at center field. He would go on to be called up, or he would be signed by the Atlanta Braves, of course, out of Curaçao, and because they had the Andrew Jones and they even had the Andrelton Simmons connection, he would eventually find his way making it up to the Atlanta Braves official team in his age 20 season in 2017. In his age 20 season, he would only play 57 games in a season where the Braves would finish with a 72-90 record. This was actually the last year in which the Braves did not make the playoffs, because this was the fourth year in a row they didn't. But in that season, he would finish with 62 hits in the 57 games he played, batting as a switch hitter, by the way. He had 34 runs in those games. He had 9 doubles, 5 triples in a 57-game season. He would finish with 6 home runs alongside 28 RBIs. He would finish the year with a 286 batting average, and then alongside his 354 on-base percentage, which is the best on-base percentage he would have in his career. He would also post a 456 slugging percentage, so that he would finish with an 810 OPS, which, if you're counting it for OPS plus, which is compared to the average player on OPS, he finished with a 110 OPS, meaning that he was 10 percentage points better than the average player, at least when it came to OPS. But like I said, the stats that really the ones that really are sticking out, the 62 hits and even 5 triples in the 57 games he played. Even though the Braves wouldn't make the playoffs, the fact that he would come on this young and show that he was this good, he would go on to prove that the Braves organization was right for bringing him up so young, so early. This would transition into his first full season with the Atlanta Braves. In his second year there, his age 21 season in 2008, he would play 158 games in a season in which the Braves would finish with the best record in the National League East. They would finish with a 90-72 record. They had flipped their record from the other year, as they had won 18 more games. This was the year which Brian Snitker would win the Manager of the Year and Ronald Acuna Jr. won the Rookie of the Year. But in Ronnie's rookie season, Ozzie Albies would be named an All-Star that year. In the 158 games he played, he finished with 167 hits, his second year in a row in which he had more hits than games played. He would finish with 105 runs. The very first time in his MLB career, he finished with 105 runs, which is very tough to do. He would go on to finish with, like I said, 40 doubles. The first time he would have 40 doubles in his career. He would finish with 5 triples. The second year in a row, he was able to finish with 5 triples. He finished with 24 home runs and 72 RBIs as he crossed the 20 home run and 70 RBI threshold for the first times in his career. He would finish with a career low, or I guess at that point, a low in batting average, was a 261, which was 25 points lower than it was his rookie year, but this was his first full season in the league. He would also go on to finish with a 757 OPS, as his OPS plus just finished at 101. In that season, he did lead the National League in home runs for like the first half of the year, but then the second half of the year it really kind of fell off, but he would still go on to finish with 167 hits on the year. In his very first All-Star season, he would help lead the Braves to a playoff series where they would end up losing in the divisional series to the Dodgers. But in 2018, this is where the Dodgers would go on and make it all the way to the World Series, where they would lose to the Boston Red Sox. So that's how that season finished. But of course, Ozzie Albies would be an All-Star in his first full year in the league. And of course, in his second year back, his third year there, in his age 22 season in 2019, Ozzie Albies would go on to play 160 games in a season where the Braves would finish with a 97-65 record. They would win the National League East for the second year in a row, with this time with 7 more wins than they had won the previous year. In those 160 games, Ozzie Albies would actually go on to lead the National League in hits, as he finished with 189 of them, even though he wasn't named an All-Star at the conclusion of the year. He also led the National League in at-bats with 640. This is the only time in his career in which he's led the MLB in hits and in at-bats. He would finish with 102 runs, making it the second year in a row he finished with at least 100 runs. He had 43 doubles, which was the second year in a row he had at least 40 doubles. He finished with 8 triples, which to this date is the most triples he's ever hit in a season. But this would be the third season in a row he's finished with at least 5. He would finish with 24 home runs, which was identical with what he did his year before. And then he had 86 RBIs, which was 14 more than the year before. He would finish the year with a career-high 295 batting average, which was 34 points higher than what it was the year before. And he would finish with an 852 OPS, which to this date is the highest OPS he's ever had. And his OPS plus of 113 is also the highest he's had in his career. And at the conclusion of 2019, even though he wasn't named an All-Star, he was named a Silver Slugger at the second base position for the very first time in his MLB career. And then at the conclusion of the year, the Braves would end up going to the National League Division Series, where they would end up losing to the Cardinals, making it the second year in a row they lost in the playoffs in the very first round. So this would transition into Ozzie's third full season, or I guess his fourth season with the Braves, in his age 23 season in 2020. He would only go on to play half of that season, as this was the season that got shortened from 162 games to 60 because of COVID. And in that 2020 season, he would go on to play 29 games in a season where the Braves would end up going 35-25. In those 29 games he played, he had 32 hits, which would continue his 4-year streak of having more hits than games played. He had 21 runs on the year, 5 doubles, and 6 home runs, 19 RBIs. He would finish with a 271 batting average and a 773 OPS. After playing half of the year, he was able to help get the Braves into the playoffs, and in that very first round, they would end up winning that first series versus the Reds, as they had to beat. As this was also the season where Freddie Freeman won the MVP in the regular season, by the way. Freddie Freeman being the player that Ozzie Albies has to throw the ball to on defense, literally almost every time he gets it. But of course, looking into that, or following that series, they would go on to beat the Marlins 3-0. And then following that series, they would end up losing in the National League Championship Series to the Dodgers, as Ozzie Albies had a couple of RBIs in that series. But that would be the closest that they had gotten, at least up until this season. And this, of course, would transition into Ozzie Albies' 5th season with the Atlanta Braves, in his 4th full season as the full-time starting second baseman. In his age 24 season in 2021, he would go on to play 156 games in a season where the Braves would finish with an 88-73 record. They won the National League East for the 4th year in a row, even though they had won 9 less games than they had the last time they played a full season, winning the NL East in 2019. In that season, Ozzie Albies would be named an All-Star for the second time in his career. In the 156 games he played, he finished with 163 hits. In the 3 seasons that he's played at least 150 games, he's finished with at least 160 hits, which is a very consistent mark, especially we're talking about players that are playing the full season. He would go on to finish with 103 runs, making it the 3rd time in his MLB career in 3 full seasons that he's had at least 100 runs scored. He finished with 40 doubles. This is the third time he's done that in his career as well. He had 7 triples, which is the second most he's ever put up in his career, and the 4th time he's ever had at least 5. He would finish with 30 home runs, which to this day is his career high. And this would be this is the first time he's ever reached the 30 home run threshold, of course, considering 30 is the record. He would go on to finish with 106 RBIs, the first time he'd ever crossed the 100 RBI threshold. And he was also one of the very few players, less than 10, that had 100 RBIs and 100 runs on the year. He would also steal 20 bases for the first time in his career. At the conclusion of the year, he finished with a .259 batting average, which is the lowest batting average that he's ever put together in a season. He would finish with a .799 OPS, which is about a middle-of-the-pack OPS, so we're talking about what he was doing, at least compared to himself. And he finished with a .105 OPS plus this most recent season. At the conclusion of the year, after being named an All-Star for the second time in his first 4 full seasons as a player, 3 eligible seasons, he would go on to be named a Silver Slugger at the second base position for the second time in his career, and he would help lead the Braves to the playoffs, where in the first round they would go on to beat the Brewers in 4. They would go on to face off against the LA Dodgers in the National League Championship Series, who had won the year before, and then they would end up beating the Dodgers in 6, and then they would go on to face off against the Houston Astros in 2020, or in the World Series, and then they would go on to beat the former World Series champs Astros in 6 games. And taking a look at how Ozzie fared, especially within that series, he finished with 5 hits in those games and 4 runs, even a stolen base, and even 4 walks to help the Braves win their very first title in that city since 1995. The very first time that the Braves have won it in my lifetime. And Ozzie Albies was not only just a player that was playing there, he was a prime contributor, he was an all-star, and he was a Silver Slugger, meaning that he was the best second baseman hitting at his position, opposite of Marcus Semien, and he was also named to the second team All-MLB in 2021 as well. But of course, that's just where he is as he's turning 25 in a sport where we see players that are hitting this well into their 40s having incredible success. I can't wait to see what the future brings for Ozzie Albies, especially as he plays in an organization with young talent such as Mike Soroka and Ronald Acuna and even Dansby Swanson, Austin Riley. It'll be interesting to see how he develops, especially with this infield, especially with this organization, now that he's already won a World Series and he has nothing left to prove to himself, at least on that point. I want to thank the Pro Baseball Reference, the ESPN, and the MLB websites for giving me all the facts and figures that I need for this episode. I want to thank everyone for listening to all 13 minutes of this episode. And if you ever get the chance, I would recommend watching Ozzie Albies. He wears number 1 for the Atlanta Braves, which is kind of reminiscent of a little bit of Ozzie Smith of the St. Louis Cardinals. I imagine it's a tribute, but of course, don't take my word for that. But with that said, I want to thank everyone once again. And once all of today's episodes and matchups are done, I will come back for tomorrow's episodes for Saturday, January 8th. And of course, hopefully I'll have a lot more to say about Ozzie Albies by this time next year on January 7th, 2023. Until then, thanks for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with more tomorrow. Peace out.